Disclaimer. To the Pharisees and Karens out there.
How dare you!
All guests on this show do not reflect the opinions of the host. The purpose of this show is to have interesting conversations, stretch our minds, and grow.
Not what we want!
If you are looking for an echo chamber, viewer and listener discretion
is advised.
You talk about extreme.
What is happening and what is up? Hold out your glass, because we're about to fill it up.
All things continually lead back to serpents, dragons, fairies, Nephilim, and fallen angels.
In the distance looms a mystical mountain.
As Mike Heiser used to say, if it's in the Bible and it's weird, it's probably important.
At its peak, a great fire burns, concealing the Prometheus lens.
This development of this knowledge that's being talked about within the mystery schools.
An ancient artifact said to reveal the hidden truth within a deliberately darkened world.
There's a hidden history that's been deliberately obfuscated from the peoples of the world.
Join us as we travel and explore the vast unknown. It's a hero's journey with dragons to slay, damsels to save, and innumerable treasures to hoard. Torches high.
The Smithsonian, they caught wind of a giant skeleton, would send their agents out to get it.
But it takes courage to move forward, to move out of the shadows, out of the unreality that we think of as reality.
We are all on the hero's journey.
Mankind has been in contact with and influenced by extraterrestrials.
Leave the sentient mound of bull feathers out of it.
You know, look at it from a different perspective.
Welcome back to the show and torches high, because with me today is the host of Prometheus Lens podcast. This is the man who leads the way to the hero's journey. Justin Doc Brown, how are you, man?
I'm doing good, man. Thank you for having me back.
Yeah, absolutely. I went to see Gladiator 2 2 weeks ago, and I was early, so I got in and I saw all the previews, and every preview but one had featured people with superpowers. And I think I saw like 9 different previews, and the only one that did not have superpowers in it was like a fictional movie about a guy who had like a neural link who this neural link allowed him to come back from the dead. So basically all these movies had something to do with the supernatural. And I think it's the story of the gods and men, and that's become this common trope that I see on every corner these days. You know, people are obsessed. There's this deeper rooted reason, I think, why humans are inclined to maybe fantasize about beings with powers, or even fantasize about getting our powers back, if you consider that maybe we had more than 5 senses and stuff like that at one time. And I think there's something about the Anunnaki story in particular that maybe fits in with this, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. I'm still trying to nail down the Anunnaki. I'm working on it. It's just close enough to parts of scripture like Deuteronomy 32 and the book of Enoch to be confusing and interesting. But I think you're a great person to talk with about this, so I'm glad you jumped on here.
Yeah, man, that's just one of those things. It's everybody wants an adventure. Everybody wants to escape the norms of reality. And who's not thought about having X-ray vision or flying through the clouds like Superman? And even when you think about, Superman, you don't think about it as a kid, but he is an alien. And in that story, there's a war. There's a galactic war, and his race is about to be wiped out, and his parents stick him in this little space suppository and shoot him straight to Earth, and he's raised as a foundling. It's the whole Joseph Campbell archetype and the hero of a thousand faces. So you have this foundling being raised by uh, estranged parents and being adopted, and then realizing who he is and going on the hero's journey and all the superpowers and stuff. So you have echoes of the Anunnaki story and legends, even with Superman.
Yeah, and you've got the kryptonite element there. It's like this weird green alien substance that's almost like a built-in checks and balances. It's like, yeah, you've got this Superman. He's an alien with superhuman abilities, but he also has this thing that can put him down. Right? And if we're going to go with that analogy, I would say that maybe in this Anunnaki story, gold is the thing that we're told was their kryptonite. Essentially, it was they needed it actually, but they needed it for their atmosphere. But it was also the thing that was killing them, was the lack of gold.
And see, that's one thing is I have seen so many glimpses, and I like how you use that word, trope, because I mean that's what it is. And you have all these different movies and hints of all these different things. The Matrix, a lot of people fail to realize the whole Gnostic viewpoint with that, and that's basically another version of the Anunnaki. And every single culture that you go to throughout the world all have a very similar story. The Indians talk about the star people came down and gave them this knowledge, and you have Quetzalcoatl that came down, and then this other entity just shows up and they battle, and ends up running Quetzalcoatl off. But when he shows up, he has 7 sages that walk around with him that they call no, I'm sorry, I'm getting them conflated because I mean they're all the same, but Viracocha.
Yes.
And he has the Viracocha, and he's basically just a mirrored image of Quetzalcoatl. But they go through and they civilize humanity. And then you go to Egypt. Osiris said that he would get on a boat, and him and his sages would sail the world and civilize the world, teaching them how to build and to farm. And you have Oannes and the Anunnaki in the Middle East. I mean, it's just the biblical narrative is the Genesis 6 and the fallen angels, the watchers. It doesn't matter where you go. The common themes of this story is universal.
Yeah, and with the one you mentioned there, Oannes, that's one that really sticks out to me as a very interesting. I think he's considered to be an Onkulu, so like an entity that's not an Anunnaki, but he's still part of the whole Anunnaki story. But he said to come up out of the Persian Gulf, out of the water, and to come on land and to teach people the creation myth, like the Enuma Elish.
Yeah, like Viracocha come out of Lake Titicaca.
Exactly. That's what it reminded me of too. And I also thought about Dagon from, I think he was worshipped in Nineveh. It's like a god.
Yeah, Iraq.
Yeah. And it's, yeah. Because, and I think too, a lot of this, like the Epic of Gilgamesh comes out of that library at Nineveh.
Mm-hmm.
And they have this Dagon fish deity there. So it seems like it's all connected. And, I was listening to Heiser do an interview yesterday. It's, of course, it's an older interview, but he was breaking down that word Elohim. And he said in some instances, Elohim is broad enough to just mean someone in the, or something in the spiritual realm, like a supernatural entity. And I was wondering if that would fit in with this conversation today too, because it got me thinking, do these gods and goddesses, Viracocha, and even the Watchers, maybe are there ties with the Anunnaki legend for you? Is there a bridge between this Anunnaki legend and the Bible for you?
Oh yeah, 100%. I think that's exactly what it is. It's like Gary Wayne talks about. It's just the polytheist version. When you look at that story, it says that there was this galactic war, and it was basically they fought with Tiamat, and a lot of people talk about how they were kind of like reptilian. They were humanoids, but they had like reptilian features. And there was this battle with Tiamat, this great chaos serpent, and that they fled and came to Earth. And the guy's name is Anton Parks. He's done a lot of research on them and decoded these tablets and talked about them, wrote a bunch of books about them. And he was talking about just all the different connected tissue with these Anunnaki and the biblical narrative. And he was saying that when these guys came and they just basically civilized Earth, and they came down to this mountain and they basically built there, and they made their divine assembly, which is a mirrored image of Yahweh and the divine council. And you hear about El and his 70 sons who had their divine council on Mount Hermon and dealt out judgment and fates for all humanity. Once again, it's just like a mirrored image, carbon copy of Yahweh and his divine council, which is all, biblically based. And he said there was basically two classes, and he kind of said that these species of quote unquote gods were the Anon or the Annun gods. He said there was basically like two clans, like they were divided. He said, and let me see. I was taking some notes because I knew I probably wouldn't remember all this stuff.
Which tablets were the ones that almost talked about them in a reptilian way? What were those tablets again?
There was a bunch of them he kept referencing, bouncing back and forth, but I think he was talking about like their tablets on Eden and when they arrived. And there it is. There was the Annuna Gods clan, and then the other clan was the Nungal. And that the Annuna had the royal powers. They were like considered higher. And the Nungal were the ones that gave the secrets of the gods to humanity and mixed with humanity. And that the Annuna gods was headed up by Enlil. And the Nungal was headed up by Enki. So you have Enki and Enlil, and they're always like battling each other and fighting for power. And Anton was talking about how he's seen all the parallels of the biblical narrative, and he said that it was his thought that the Nungal were the fallen angels because they rebelled against the high order and were basically excommunicated and pushed out of the divine council and with the council of the gods. And that he sees lots of parallels with Yahweh and Enlil.
Yes.
And he said he sees lots of parallels with Enki and Satan.
Yeah.
Because he said that that Enki is like a Prometheus archetype, that he gives the fire to humanity. He's the benefactor of man, the divine rebel, and he's excommunicated for it because in their creation tablets and stuff, it says that as they're cultivating the land and setting up this civilization, that the Gigi gods were complaining, saying that they're tired all the time, they're working too hard, they needed help. So Enki is called upon because he's the god of wisdom, and he creates humanity as slaves to do the work for the gods. And they paint Enlil as like this, domineering, don't care for humanity kind of guy. But Enki creates humanity and kind of feels sorry for them, has compassion for them. And then kind of like as a trick, because he's kind of depicted as the trickster, he gives divine knowledge to some of them and gives them free will so that eventually they will cause trouble for the gods and rebel.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think about this? Because as you're talking, and this is a take that I haven't heard, so this is why I'm doing this with you, man. I knew you're gonna blow my mind somehow or some way. But what do you think about this? Because as you're talking, I'm thinking about hierarchy, and I'm wondering if you see this as a one or God, just God at the top, and then below that, Enki, Enlil, and maybe this Elohim-like panel, and then below that, General Anunnaki, and then below that, a Gigi, and then maybe below that, humans.
Yeah, there's a total pyramid structure because even with the biblical narrative, it says that that heaven is a kingdom, and Yahweh is the Lord of hosts. All kingdoms have armies. They have messengers, the angels, anglios. You have Michael, who is the divine warrior, and Raphael, and a lot of the text is talked about as the healer. So you have this hierarchy structure. So that God is God; He doesn't need them, but it's kind of like his family that He's built to help rule. And you see that with these characters here too.
Justin is right. I am Esau.
Jacob I loved, but Esau I hated. Esau is one of the most enigmatic characters in the Bible. His birth alone is strange, to say the least. He came out red, covered in hair, from head to toe, like a hairy cloak. What if I told you there's much more to this guy's story, but has been lost to us throughout the ages? That his story is scattered in pieces throughout other ancient extra-biblical books. This is a story of what we would call today a Bigfoot. The story goes back to the Garden of Eden, a serpent, supernatural garments, and a birthright. This tale reveals Esau's connections to the Nephilim giants and his genealogy's role in the end times. Welcome to an epic journey. This is the Epic of Esau. The Epic of Esau is much more than a mere book. It's a challenging new vision.
And like with their power structure, Anu is the high god, but they kind of paint him as just kind of like this old man with a beard in the sky. Just do whatever, let my kids just do whatever. I'm just going to lay around and do what I want to do, kind of thing. And then right underneath them, like you had said, you had Enki and then Lil. And then you had some more people up underneath them, and it just kind of tiered down that way. Mm-hmm. But Michael Heiser had a book, and I read it and took some notes on it, and it was all about the Anunnaki. And he, I mentioned that Anton guy, and of course, I don't know much about Anton, and he's given his opinions on a lot of stuff. Now, but as far as Mike, I know Mike, I don't know him personally, but I know him well enough that he's a scholar.
Yep.
He ain't going to talk about, stuff that's not in the text. And if he is going to speculate, he'll come right out and say, well, this is my speculation. But in his book, he kind of lays out some groundwork, and he talks about the Agigi were basically translated as the gods of heaven. And the Anaku is the gods of the underworld. So you get to kind of like the whole Watchers theme. But the gods of Nippur, you had a close association with the Anunnaki, and that term was adopted later by the Hittites. And the Agigu first appear in the old Babylonian text from the time of Hammurabi. and shortly before. But basically, the Enuma Elish goes on to say that there were 600 of these gods and that they were split. 300 was to rule in heaven and 300 on earth. So once again, we come back to the whole biblical narrative in the book of Enoch, but they only record that there was 200 that fell and rebelled in the days of Jared and Enoch.
Yeah, the parallels are there. They're certainly there, and that's what I've been trying to nail down. Now I'm still learning about Anunnaki. And I mean, I know it's everywhere right now. In addition to those movie tropes I was talking about and this renewed interest in superpowers, there's this newfound interest in the Anunnaki and in that story. And I just see that, especially in recent years, this has just exploded as a topic. And there's even this, it filters down to humans because there's the idea that I've come across of an Anunnaki bloodline that goes back to Mesopotamia, back to this region we're talking about where the Anunnaki are said to come down to Earth. And some researchers think that they became the Merovingians or a line of kings. I think that Holy Bloodline, Holy Grail book kind of talks a little bit about that because Anunnaki means royal blood. From what I understand, it does not mean those from heaven who came to earth. That's said to be a mistranslation, even though they are those from heaven who came to earth. Apparently, it just means royal blood. But anyway, it's the idea that a royal bloodline of kings who actually ruled on earth, who were flesh and blood kings, go back to these entities. They trace their lineage back somehow.
Yeah, it's a princely seed.
Okay. Yeah.
Is what that name translates to. And as far as like Christian biblical worldview, which a lot of people don't align with it, and it kind of get touchy when you bring it up. But that goes back to the serpent seed doctrine, the seed of the serpent, the reptilian seed. And you have these ruling class that talk about, they trace their genealogies back to this, this dragon court, this seed of the serpent. And with this context that we're talking about today, it's the Anunnaki, who were depicted as humans, but with reptilian features. They are the true blue bloods.
Yeah. I was going to say a lot of researchers suggest they actually had blue blood. Some people think that our blood is red because of the iron content, and they think that the copper in these entities' blood made their blood actually blue.
Yeah.
And we're talking about these crazy hybrid giant kings too, that trace their lineage back to the Anunnaki, maybe had this blue blood as well. But I'm with you, man. That serpent dragon iconography, you see it in a lot of the family crests for old royal families.
It's all over the what's it called, where the Pope lives?
Yeah.
That city, the Catholicism. You
Vatican.
See dragons. The Vatican. That you have that whole sanctuary where his throne is. It looks like a huge serpent head inside of there.
It's in London.
I've seen videos of them like zooming in on the deco of the border between the ceiling and the walls. You have dragon heads and serpent imagery all over that place.
Yep. I mean, and what's interesting for me is I think you find it a lot in these areas of the world that are designated. DC and the Vatican are their own, like, what do you call that? A nation state or something like that? No, it's it's some sort of, they're their own little country somehow.
Exactly, yeah.
And there's a part of London, like the banking section of London, that does that as well. And I think CERN does it as well. So there's a couple of these little pockets of these power hubs on Earth where these people have made the parameters around their operation there. And they're kind of, in some some ways above the law. But anyways, what you find there, like you point out, is you find a lot of the serpent iconography. Like I said, it's all over the Vatican. And the Vatican, you have the pine cones everywhere. And when you look back at a lot of these Anunnaki carvings from the ancient Sumerian world and Mesopotamia, all throughout that region, you'll see the Anunnaki depicted holding up a pine cone.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of parallels.
And one thing I thought was fascinating too was that guy was talking about the Anton. He was talking about their story when they came, and that they come to that mountain and they set up their divine council, and they built the city and all that stuff. I started thinking of, I'm really big into looking at other mythologies and seeing the common threads and themes. So you have all the commonalities with the Bible, but you also have all the commonalities with Mount Olympus. These gods go to Mount Olympus, they build this civilization, this divine council and hierarchy there. Boom, you have that with this story. Then you go to the Norse gods. They all go to this mountain, this holy mountain up in the sky, and boom, they build Asgard. And in their legends, this giant comes and they feel they need to build these huge defensive walls and block themselves off from everybody for protection. And this story is the same. They come, and the word they said used for Eden is what is it? It's translated as paradise in these tablets, and the Greek is paradosis, and this word is used to describe a garden with an enclosure or a park with animals. And that's kind of how they seen humanity. They created us as these dumb things that were made for servitude. And it says that they made this garden and that they had all their fruits and stuff growing there. And that humanity, the ones that Inky give a little bit of intelligence and knowledge to, a group of them snuck in to the mountain and the garden and stole the fruits. And in doing so, contaminated the garden and got some of the gods sick. So they burnt part of the garden to kill the contaminants. And where Inky was their creator, and him and his mother had been around humanity so much, they had built up immunity to them. So they weren't affected by it. So he was now basically the messenger of the gods. He was Hermes. He was the one that went to talk to the gods and go talk to humanity and pass messages back and forth. He was the middleman. So the gods tell him to go talk to humanity and tell them that they can't enter the garden anymore, and that they build up this huge wall to keep humanity out. And I thought about, Mount Olympus and the Norse mythology, Asgard, how they made this huge wall to keep everybody out.
Yeah, you're talking about a group of these entities that snuck into the garden. And it just made me think about something I was reading. There's parts in the Sumerian text that describe Anunnaki as having a glow or being shiny. And it reminded me of shining ones. Reminds me of that word Nakash that describes this entity that snuck into the garden and tempted Eve, right?
Yeah. The seraphim. Yeah. Sarah, means to burn. And what's cool too is that in that tablet, the word that describes this place that they built was called Kershag. And it basically translates to city of the gods. And that's where the divine assembly met. Well, the highest cities in Turkey is known as Kardog, which is a cognate of the word Karshag, but it also can be translated as the Black Mountain. and that there's a mountain peak in Turkey called Karadog, close to the Tigris and the Euphrates River, just as the tablets describe.
Man, that is crazy. And like in the Sumerian myths where they come down in Mesopotamia, in that Tigris Euphrates region, of course, that's modern day Iraq. And what you know, in recent years, that's exactly where we have this totally unfounded war where it's like, was it a feud between the Bush family and Saddam, or was it something else? Because when you look at those Clinton emails, it seems like these old gods may have been a factor in why we invaded Iraq, why we went to this region in the first place, because Gilgamesh is mentioned by name in the emails, who is this king said to be a Sumerian line of Anunnaki, and he's described sometimes as 2/3 god and 1/3 human. And there are accounts from that invasion of U.S. troops. People who were there have actually come out and kind of blew the whistle on this, as it were, saying that they went, when they got to Iraq, they went immediately to the Baghdad Museum and raided that. And of course, in the media, they blamed it on looting. They said that, you know, it's this thing that happens in wartime. The locals came in and looted this, but it was actually our military who's said to have gone in there first. And it just got me thinking, it's like, were the weapons of mass destruction in the museum? Because when you look at Saddam, he had an interest in bringing back the region's past. Like, he wanted to revive Babylon. He was interested in the God Kings. And that's a museum that showcased a lot of these texts that we're talking about today. I think they had the Epic of Gilgamesh there, but they also had like weird stuff like the Baghdad Battery, which there were like 14 of those were found. That indicates that these people had electricity way back in the day. So for me, that goes back to this connection point with these little G gods. And it goes back to this group of humans living in this area of Mesopotamia who had ancient technology given to them. Like, you know, you're talking about this mountain in Turkey. The name is perfect. It's like it's named after this ancient event. We're talking about gods coming down and giving ancient technology to these people. And when you look at that Iraq war, it really looks like we went in there looking for more than just stuff to do with Saddam, like surface stuff, like, you know, like missiles, and all that.
Yeah. And you had the Clinton emails too.
Yeah.
That got released during the WikiLeaks stuff, where she's directly asking, you know, what did they recover the body? Shows you what they went for. You know, the Euphrates River started drying up, and then they found the tomb of Gilgamesh. And that's what they were after. It was just like a week or so later.
Yeah. Which I'll say, you know, that does back up this story somewhat to me. The fact that you have the Epic of Gilgamesh and it says all this stuff about the Anunnaki, and then we find the tomb of Gilgamesh. That does lend some credence to this story, but I'm not completely sold on all of this yet. This whole Anunnaki thing. Maybe I should.
See, I do. I believe it, but I think it's just a fallen realm twisted version of the biblical narrative. Because, you know, like I'd said earlier, they said that Anton guy said there was two clans, the Annuna, the royal class, the loyal angels, or whatever how you want to look at that, and then the what I say, the Nungal. And the Nungal translates as the high princes. And this all filters through like the biblical narrative and Deuteronomy 32, because the Tower of Babel, it says, you know, that the nations, everybody gets hung up on the tongues. You know, it says in there in 32 verse 8 that not only were the tongues divided, it says the nations were divided amongst the sons of God.
Yep.
And when you get into these Sumerian and Akkadian texts, you have the same exact thing, because even with the Enuma Elish, when Marduk conquers, he divides up the portions and delegates everything to these Ajiji. 300 for the upper, 300 for the lower. And it's just like a retelling of the allotments of Deuteronomy 32. It's just a fallen realm version. And these Nungal are the rebellious sons of God that commingled with the daughters of men, and Enki being at the helm. And in that story, it says that Enlil, when he first comes to Earth, he has a high priestess with him named Menti or Ninma. And she's a very important deity and described as a serpent goddess. And there's basically a love triangle that happens, that Enki and her start working together with humanity. And he basically steals this woman, this priestess, from his brother Enlil. And what I find fascinating is the name Ninma. It sounds very close to Nama. And Nama was a name given in the Bible in the genealogies of Genesis. And if you know anything about genealogies, the women are not named. So when you get a woman in a genealogy, that's a huge exclamation point that would catch any ancient reader's attention. And she was the daughter of Lamech. And Lamech was the first one to be recorded anyway, to have multiple wives and transgress the creation order of God. And he had 3 sons. And for the first time in a genealogy, might be the only time, it goes into talking about the specialty knowledge and crafts of these 3 sons. It says one was an expert in the metalworking and ironsmithing. Another one was great in farming and being a shepherd. And it lists all their professions and how they were just experts and leading in their craft. And then you get, and their sister was Nama. And this was during the time of the fallen angels coming down. And when you look into the book of Enoch, these are some of the traits and some of the skills that they taught mankind. And all of a sudden, these 3 guys just become experts at these things. And then you look into the etymology of this woman's name. Her name means calmly and beautiful. And when you read the book of Enoch, in Genesis 6, it says that the sons of God saw the daughters of men were calmly and beautiful. I think the writers were trying to tell us, hey, this is where it started. They came down. Nama might have been the first woman that was taken, and in exchange, all this knowledge was given to that family. And you have this similar event in these Sumerian and Akkadian tablets. And this serpent figure, Enki, the benefactor of man that gives divine knowledge and tampers with the gene pool with the help of this Ninma. Wow. And makes a new subclass of humans.
Yeah. Wow. And going back to the Tower of Babel for a second, because I wanted to comment on something that you brought up. And this is something I've heard Heiser talk about too, because I've really gotten to a point where I'm paying more attention to the work that he did when he was still alive. It's been kind of calling out to me. And I heard him talking just the other day about Babel, and basically what you said was, God divided the nations among the sons of God. And of course, sons of God is a term that we hear in relation to this Mount Hermon event that you're talking about, right? That would indicate that it's the same group of people that, but what Heiser was talking about was that that was when God decided or started thinking about creating Israel and having his own people, having his own nation. It's like, so there's these other entities, and God made them like almost like governors over these provinces and divided all that up. But at the same time, he's like, I'm going to pick one for myself, and it's going to be these people, Israel.
Yeah. Yep. And then he calls out Abraham, and then that's the key point, because
yes,
it was the plan from the beginning. Because when he called out Abraham, he said, "Through your name, all nations shall be blessed," and he was going to call back all of those nations under his wing through the coming of the Messiah. Because the last breath on the cross, Christ said, to telestai, it is paid in full.
Yeah, so it really lays out scripture for you. These key little events are interwoven in this grander narrative. So it helps to understand them or have an understanding of them and to ponder that. And also it's almost like God picked Abraham because Abraham and his wife were old. They were too old to be able to have kids. So there's this miraculous element to it. Like, not only am I going to pick Abraham and choose him to start this line, but I'm going to do something only I can do and allow these elderly people essentially to have a child to kick this off.
Mm-hmm.
And I think too, what I was getting at, because I do see the parallels here with Anunnaki from the Sumerian and the Bible. But I think what I was getting at is like, I think some people get overwhelmed with the Sumerian stuff and assume it's more correct than the Bible because it appears to be older. But in my personal experience, the Bible holds up maybe even better than the Sumerian myths. And I'll tell people straight up, I think there's something to the Anunnaki, but I'm not convinced that they told the full truth about themselves. I can look at the knowledge of the Sumerians and see that they were probably in touch with these beings or with something that had higher intelligence. It seemed like they had a direct line with something of higher intelligence because they were so extremely advanced. But I think it's possible that the Anunnaki twisted the story to make themselves look more powerful in the end.
Yeah, and the thing is too is you got to remember, just because something is written down first doesn't mean it's the correct one. And if you look at the biblical narrative, it says the angels and God were made to dwell in heaven. In Jude, it talks about the fallen angels. It says, those who kept not their first estate, they transgressed and came down. So, of course, you're going to get their version written down first. They were here first. The ones that stayed in line with God, they stayed up in heaven. They were doing what they were supposed to do. They were truly watching. We were given dominion of earth. They were just to watch and kind of overlook and make sure, we're safe and doing things like we need to be doing. The fallen angels transgressed and came down and commingled with us and presented themselves as gods. So, of course, they're the ones that taught writing. You're going to get their story first. Doesn't make it the right story.
Yeah.
Makes it the twisted, fallen realm version. And then later, God sends his son and his angels, his messengers, to give the correct story. And that's why they sound so similar, because they stem from a more ancient source, which is the truth. It's just, like you said, you're getting their twisted version that's painting them in a more favorable light. And yeah, it's older because they were here first. Duh. I mean, that doesn't make it the truth.
Yeah. And I came across a Sumerian tale where the Anunnaki were explaining to the Sumerians their beliefs. They were explaining their Anunnaki beliefs. And they said that they believed in one God called the Father of all creation. So even by their own word of, even by their own beliefs, they're not God.
Mm-hmm. And even their depictions, you see them, with half man, half bird, and you have some of those little teraphim that they look like snakes, breastfeeding a human child, uh, and half fish. You just got all these different kind of like hybrid looking depictions of them. And that goes along with the biblical narrative too, because, Jubilees and Jasher and Enoch talks about that they even sinned against the beasts of the field and the birds of the air. They were making all these, hybrid beings, and that's where you get all these stories throughout, history and these different mythos of minotaurs and depictions of these Annunaki gods with the bird heads and all this crazy stuff, because they were doing it. And people want to laugh and say, "Oh, it's just made up. That stuff ain't real." But we're doing it now, folks.
Mm-hmm.
If they're cloning sheep, and we did a show a few months back. There was a farmer in Montana that got busted. He took like an extinct giant ram's blood
Yeah,
that
I've
they
heard
had
about
dug up.
this.
Yeah, they dug up this ancient ram that had went extinct, but there was marrow still in the bone. They extracted it and mixed it with another modern ram, and boom, they made these rams with horns as wide as a truck, and that they were like 6 foot tall at the shoulder, and basically made a Jurassic Park hunting ground. People paid thousands and thousands of dollars to go to this place and hunt these exotic animals to have them, mounted and put on their wall, because that's the only place on earth you could get them, because they were genetically created.
Yeah, and if you look at the work of Michael Tellinger, he suggests that the Anunnaki were in South Africa experimenting and making chimeras and stuff like hybrids, right? And you and I might say that that's, I don't know, we might look at that story and say maybe it's Nephilim or Watchers, but he says Anunnaki because the Zulu shaman in that region have legends of these beings who came down and treated that whole region like a laboratory. And it's in Botswana, Africa. And they have legends of gods coming down and creating slaves to work in gold mines in Botswana. So I looked into it, and there is a region right there called the Sodilo Hills that the locals call Mountain of the Gods, where this event said to have transpired. And so I started looking into it just to see, because, one of the things he said was that this is the real life Dr. Moros Island. Like do you know what I'm talking about? It's like some movie where the guy, this like mad scientist, is out isolated on an island and he's creating all these like Frankenstein things. But anyway, so I looked at Sedilo Hills and the Mountain of the Gods, and I was like, I'm going to look up rock art. So I was looking at all the old, like essentially like the old cave paintings, and I found some pretty wild stuff. Actually, I'm going to show you a picture real quick.
Yeah, you find some wild stuff, especially like those old Paleolithic cave art down in France, and yeah.
So
And they attribute it to people tripping off of mushrooms and drawing crazy stuff.
And this one jumped out at me. This is a rock carving from that area where there are legends of hybrid experiments being done on people and wildlife. So this picture stood out to me because it looks like an elephant head on a horse.
Yeah.
Isn't that crazy? There was no description on this whatsoever. There was no nobody had an explanation for this, but it's obviously something weird. I just found it interesting because it's in this area. So, there's legends of humans being crossed with lions in this area.
Yeah.
And that
you get the stuff in the Bible too, the lion-faced men of Moab.
Moab, yeah, exactly. So it got me thinking, like maybe this was going on, and this ties in with why God created, or God sent a flood as well, right?
Yeah.
Because these beings were down here creating all sorts of bastardized creatures, and I also came up against or across Inanna again, Ishtar. Because in one of the Sumerian texts, it seems
She's
like
the lady of the Anunnaki. She's listed, that's her name, her title, the lady of the Anunnaki.
Yep, she's like an Anunnaki queen, and in one of the texts, it seems to point to her being in Africa because it says her partner, the Muses, dies and does not want to be brought back to life, and it does allude to them having the technology to bring him back to life. But for whatever reason, he stayed dead. And she buries him, it says, in the land of the black people. So I'm assuming that that's in the ancient world, that definitely refers to Africa. You know, that's just what the texts say. So it's almost like she was in this area messing around, you know, and she's also mentioned in an account of the flood in Gilgamesh. It's like the Anunnaki version of the flood. It's like the Bible, but Noah, instead of Noah, he's called Utpishna.
Utnapishtim, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the Sumerian Lugubanda and Merkur epic mentions the Anunnaki as the gods of the mountains. You know, you had mentioned that.
Yeah.
And the Epic of Gilgamesh, they go into the cedar forests. You know, this is Mount Hermon and Lebanon area to battle Humbaba. And even in there, it says that this was the secret dwelling place of the Anunnaki.
Yeah.
Come on, folks. I mean, that's what the book of Enoch plainly says, where the angels came down. I mean, the connection is there. And one thing I found too, if you will allow me, we'll have some story time with Doc Brown. I found this in this book of Norse legends, and where Anton was talking about those two classes, and then of course, you know, with the biblical worldview, this is the good sons of God, the angels, and then the rebellious ones. You have that in the Norse legends. A lot of people just think about the gods of Asgard. There was a whole second class, and there was a huge war in heaven. Treaties worked out amongst themselves and all that in your Norse legends, and it mirrors this very same story of these Anunnaki gods.
Let's hear it.
Okay. It says the realm of the gods created was called Asgard, the home of the gods. It was a shining and beautiful city of golden palaces and great halls, a place where the gods could live happily and peacefully while keeping watch over the world of men. A council of the gods that was held at the creation of Asgard, and it was decided that no harm should ever come to anyone within the realm, and that it should remain a place of peace and harmony. One day, however, the gods of Asgard learned that they were not the only gods in existence. They were visited by a goddess known as Gulveg, a traveler and sorceress hailing from a tribe of gods called the Vanir. She was a practitioner of Sidir, a form of Vanir magic that dealt with the seeing and shaping of future events. And she had a great love for gold. The Azir offered Gilveg hospitality at first, and she stayed for a time in Asgard. During her stay, she offered to help the Azir with their difficulties through Sidir, and offered gold as gifts to those that she spoke to. At first, her help was appreciated, and her magic made life easier for the Azir. But before long, her presence in Asgard became less and less welcome. Her magic, though powerful, began to sway the minds of the Azir towards selfishness, and her greed for gold was contagious, causing fighting and corruption amongst the gods of Asgard. Eventually, the Azir turned against Golveg and attempted to execute her for the strife that she had brought into Asgard. But although she was run through with a spear and burned, she was reborn. Gelveg was burned 3 times, each time returning to life before she finally left Asgard, but returned to Vanaheim. And it was not long before the conflicts arose between the two clans of gods, especially after Gelveg's sowing of discord among the Azir, and from the perspective of the Vanir, her barbaric treatment at the hands of her hosts. Early attempts at peacemaking fell through, and eventually there was full-scale war between the Azir and the Vanir. The war was brutal and earth-shaking, as the gods tore entire mountains from the ground and icebergs from the sea to hurl back and forth. However, both sides of the war were evenly matched, and seeing that there was no way either could win, it was eventually decided that a peace treaty must be signed, and the Azir and the Vanir came together to hold a meeting and came into agreement that the only way to solve the conflict was to join the two clans as one. A large jug was brought out, and each of the Azir and Vanir gods spat into the jar, mixing their spit together before shaking hands. Kazvir, a wise, kind man who became the greatest of all poets, was born from this mixture. After this ritual was performed, the two clans exchanged hostages to ensure that they would be forever bound to each other. The Azir sent over Odin's own brother, Honir, who was a handsome and well-built man whom would be perfectly suited to be the chief of the Vanir. Mimir, the wise and kind giant, was sent to serve as Honir's advisor. From the Vanir came the sea god Nord and his 2 children, Freya and Freyr. The daughters of Freyja was the most beautiful of all the gods, and her brother Freyr was equally handsome. From then on, Freya and Freyr and Nord lived among the Azir in Asgard, and the two clans were united as allies.
Wow. What was that again that you read?
It's called the Azir Vanir War.
Wow.
Yeah, so you had the gods of Asgard. They were known as the Azir. They thought they were the only ones. They came to build Earth, civilized it, made Asgard, and was humanity, and just seeing over everything. And all of a sudden, just a stranger walks up, and it's that woman with these special powers and could see the future and do all these magical things. But she had a fascination with gold. It sounds like these Anunnaki.
Yeah.
And she was trading services with them for gold, but she ended up corrupting the gods, and they were all getting greedy and fighting with each other. So they tried to kill her and get rid of her. And she goes back and tells all the other people that are like her, and then they come and they clash.
Do you think that the gods fighting in that story refers to some sort of a catastrophe?
I mean, it could very well be. It could be like a catastrophe, and because a lot of people think that myth is man's way of explaining natural phenomena, and that could be true, but I think it's kind of like a on earth as it is in heaven thing, because you get in the Bible, you hear about these wars and stuff, and it talks about the angels warring right there with them, that there was there's wars in heaven at the same time, and that the angelic hosts coming and fighting, and the princes are fighting. And you hear of Daniel praying, and took several weeks for the angel to finally come to him, because he said he'd been fighting with the prince of Persia, and Greece held him back for so many days, and that the Prince Michael had to come and fight and free him up. So you have all this cosmic battle going on at the same time. And what springs to my mind is the Hindu mythology, the Vimanas.
Yeah.
And how there was wars in heaven, and all that could be tied straight into a lot of the catastrophic events like the Young Dryas and the Great Flood and things like that too.
Yeah, that reminds me too of some connections I've seen with Inanna or Ishtar or Ashtar, because, like you said before, she's a part of this Anunnaki discussion. She's almost like an Anunnaki queen, right? And because the Nephilim show back up after the flood, I'll pose this question: Did they get off planet somehow? Because like you mentioned in the Vedic text, they describe people in the ancient world having these flying devices and being able to go to other planets. So did some of these Nephilim manage to get off the planet during the flood? Maybe with the help of Ishtar, because I do think she's involved. She's mentioned in the flood Gilgamesh tablet 11. It says the gods were cowering like dogs. They were crouching by a wall, and it says Ishtar shrieked like a woman in childbirth. And it says the sweet-voiced mistress of the gods wailed on that day. So Ishtar is involved, and I see her as, there's another story involving Gilgamesh where she comes down and tells Gilgamesh to go up with her into the sky because she likes to fly the skies of Earth. In the story, Gilgamesh declines because he says, all the men who go up with you never return. But so he never goes up with her. And so thus, I guess he keeps his life. But the moral of the story for me is she was flying the skies of Earth. How? Because you see in a lot of the old Anunnaki carvings, you'll see what's a sphere with wings. And to me, I think that means that there was some sort of a sphere that could fly. At least it points to that for me.
Yeah.
And you've got all these other tie-ins. I mean, Ishtar with the modern UFO movement, that stuff. So
all
it's
the
like
orbs in the sky and wheels within wheels, Ezekiel, and you see a lot of that, like with the stuff. I've seen a lot of videos of the whole stuff going on in New Jersey. People zooming in with nice cameras, and you can see it looks like wheels within wheels turning. It's just wild.
Yeah.
I don't think you can do is speculate. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I've heard people say, for them to be able to jump off world or do this or do that, that means that they outsmarted God or God failed. And I mean, I can see that to a point. But if it was not God's intention to totally wipe them all out, if it was just maybe to level the playing field so humanity could have a fighting chance, but
doesn't
they
this
were
go
there
back
before and after, so they come back somehow.
Yeah, but doesn't this go back to something we talked about in the pre-roll, where we were talking about how God allows for people's evil plans to go through sometimes, and because he's doing 3D chess, he's thinking ahead. He's like, okay, let them go ahead and do this and think that they're getting this victory. I'm gonna allow them to go through with it, and I'm going to use that event. I'm going to use that situation that they think is a victory so that I can put my plans in motion.
Yeah.
I think about that a lot of times whenever I hear people saying that people outsmarted God. Maybe God just allowed them to go through with it because he's outsmarting them the whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like teenage kids that think they outsmart their parents and going to sneak out, and the parents know they're going to sneak out, but they're like, I'll go let them have their fun, but I'll be sitting here in the chair to catch them when they try sneaking in, and I hope it's going to be worth it for them because I'm going to tan their hide when they get home.
Yeah. But my thought was, and I'm not going to linger on this too much, but my thought was, if Ishtar was flying around in the skies of the ancient world and she's this Anunnaki queen that somehow has the means to fly around and bring men up into the sky with her and all that, that makes me scratch my head when I see her popping up in the modern UFO movement. Because for me, it's like, okay, is this that same entity up to the same old tricks, doing what she's always done for all, for all of antiquity? And now, because the UFO religion that emerged right alongside of Roswell in 1947 was steeped in Ashtar lore, Ashtar revelations, Ashtar visitations. For a time, they actually called it the Ashtar Command. These people out in the desert, led by Doug Van Tassel, were saying they were talking to some entity named Ashtar, while simultaneously they're building up this UFO religion in the desert. A lot of people think of 1947, they think of Roswell, and that happened. But over in the shadows, what doesn't get talked about a lot is this UFO religion that sprung up at the same time. And she is mentioned all through that. So it just got me thinking, because I guess the broader point here would be, or a question I'll pose would be, do you think that these old little g gods still meddle around with our human affairs today?
Oh yeah, 100%. Yeah, because I didn't know anything about the whole Ishtar stuff with Roswell. That's all new to me. I have to check that out. But no, I mean, Paul says it in Scripture. He says we battle not against flesh and blood. It's against rulers and principalities, spiritual wickedness in high places. It's these fallen entities, these fallen watchers, the sons of God from Deuteronomy 32. And that answers a lot of the questions that a lot of Christians have so much trouble with, because they lack this supernatural worldview and won't have these conversations and look into these uncomfortable, quote unquote, weird things. But it's right there in your Bible. And you have so many people that are atheists or are victims of a cruel world, and they're bitter, and they say, if your God is a God of love, or your Bible says your God is a God of love, but look at all the murder, the rape, the atrocities, the starving children in Africa. My sister was raped by her stepfather till she was 17 years old. So if your God is real, he's shitty. And I don't want nothing to do with him, because, I mean, if he is real, he obviously sucks at his job. And it's like, you are missing the whole Deuteronomy 32 worldview. Yes, God is the creator of all, and he is a God of love, but he's also a God of laws and justice, and he keeps his word. And he's, like you said, he's got an overall big plan. And at Deuteronomy 32, we were chasing after these Anunnaki. These fallen sons of God came down, glowing and all their splendor, and pulling fire out of their hats, and giving us Baghdad batteries, and showing us all this magic and cool stuff. And we worshiped them as gods. And in return, they gave us all the cool tech, showed us all the forbidden knowledge, all the stuff that mean, nasty God was keeping from us, because they were our benefactors. And in return, hey, just let us do some experiments on the animals and the people. Let us have sex with your women and make some hybridized beings, and we'll protect you and give you all the weapons and all the cool knowledge and stuff. Just worship us as gods, and we'll take care of you. And that's what Paul talks about. We traded the truth for a lie. We traded the dominion that was given to us to these fallen entities. And where God gave us dominion, he let us do with it what we wanted. And we traded the truth for a lie and gave dominion away. And we were chasing after these false gods. So God said, okay, you want these gods to rule over you? You can have them, but you're not going to like it. But my security plan, my ace up the sleeve, is that Jacob, Israel, is going to be my allotted portion. And through Abraham, all nations are going to be blessed. And I made this contract with humanity. So therefore, I'm going to send my son in the flesh, and he's going to come back, and he is going to uh, seal the deal and get back the land deed and the contract for the dominion of earth. So we have these fallen entities, these Anunnaki, whatever label you want to put on it, still ruling over the nations today and pulling the strings of the world leaders. And God is just waiting for us to make the free will choice to basically pull our green card and citizenship away from these fallen entities' rule and apply for citizenship of his kingdom, which is not of this earth. And he tarries because of his love for us. He wants to see all of us get away from under the thumb and rule of these unjust gods. And in the end, that's what's going to be. It's going to be a return to Eden under the rule of our Heavenly Father, and everything's going to return back to perfection. But that's why Earth is the way it is now, is because those entities are still in control, ruling over the nations and pulling the strings. But one thing I found that was a hypothesis I definitely wanted to throw out with you about the Anunnaki is that handbag.
Oh, yeah. We could talk about that.
Everybody talks about that handbag. And I've heard a lot of cool theories and stuff. But in a lot of the depictions, you see them with the handbag. But in the other hand, like you talked about this pine cone or this fruit, this thing they're holding out, and they're like offering it. And it looks to me like they just pulled it out of this bag.
Mm.
And the Anunnaki said the first thing they done, they come down to this mountain and made a garden. And, like I told you earlier, that translates from the Akkadian to paradise. And it refers to an enclosed structure. And they closed it in and had a garden, and mankind snuck in and stole the fruit, right? Enki is the Prometheus, said to be the benefactor of man, and Prometheus come down and gave the fire. Well, they were kicked out because they were trying to steal this fruit. What if these depictions are showing like a gathering basket, and they're offering them the fruit from the Garden of Eden? And it's not any fruit. I think that could be the fruit of the tree of life for eternal life. They're offering them a lie, something they can't give them, eternal life. And I found another parallel in this old book, Adventures of the Giants. And I ain't going to read from it, but there's a story in there called Idun, not Eden, Idun, and the Golden Apples. And this is another Norse legend that, just like the other story, the gods are living happy, merry, everything's cool. But then up walks this mysterious woman named Idun, and she has a basket and this handbag, and it's full of golden apples. And she offers it to them. And upon eating it, all the gray hairs of the gods disappear. They all become young again. And they offer her a spot on their mountain in Asgard to stay with them. And she brings them apples every day and keeps them youthful, because the gods of Asgard are not immortal. They can die and they get old. And there's a part in the story where Loki, the Inky, always playing tricks, makes a deal with an evil bird that threatens to kill him, and he makes a deal with it and says that he would bring this bird, which turns out to be a giant that can shapeshift, that he would give this giant Eden or Iden and her golden apples. So he leads her out and lets this, giant chimera bird kidnap her, but she refuses to give him the apples. And she stays gone for several days, and the gods start to die. Their gray hair comes back that said Thor. His hands start to shake. He can't even hold the hammer. And the gods get together and win her back and bring her back to Asgard and start eating the apples and get rejuvenated once again. But I thought that was fascinating that here we have another Anunnaki showing up with a basket full of golden apples and offering it to the gods.
Yeah, that does look like an offering pose when you see them holding out that pine cone or the fruit or whatever that is. And I like your hypothesis. I think you're on to something. I think it fits in with this conversation we're having today too, especially. But I've been I've kind of wondered if that handbag was a shaman's kit, honestly, because a number of years ago I saw where somebody had dug up, it was like an archaeological dig, and they had found an old shaman's kit, and it's a little bag about the same size, and it's made of like leather or like hide or something like that. And what they did was they laid out all of the little items that they found in this ancient shaman's kit, and it was herbs and medicine and crystals and hair and things for rituals, things for ritualistic purposes, things perhaps for healing. Yeah, you could fit a pine cone in there too if that had some sort of significance to you for whatever you're trying to do. But it just got me thinking when I saw the shaman's kit from the archaeological dig and I saw everything laid out, I thought, man, that looks a lot like those handbags. And this is not something that modern people can really wrap their head around because, there was a clump of hair in there and all these herbs and all this stuff that means nothing to us today. The contents of the shaman's kit is like a foreign language to us today. But back before hospitals and before cars and the hustle and bustle of the modern world, the traveling shaman relied on things from the earth that when you use them in an alchemical way, they produce magical qualities, whether it's healing, whether it's getting in touch with the old gods. I know last time we talked, I showed you a picture that L.A. Marzulli had taken, and it looks like a shaman. And it's one of the most foreign images to a modern person. It's just trippy, right? Nothing makes any sense. So, but that's what it reminded me of. Just an old ancient way of healing people and making things Merlin stuff,
Yeah. Well,
I'll tell you,
all we can do is speculate on
Yeah.
that stuff too, but it's like I'd heard somebody had mentioned that, and then I found that those old myths about the bag and the apples and the giving of eternal life, and then I seen those depictions of them holding the bag and like they're offering, a piece of
Yeah.
fruit or something to them.
You could be right.
And you
Man.
even have depictions of Enki and Enlil and these Anunnaki around this tree of life. You have lots of stone carvings with them gathered around this tree.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love these old texts. I really do. I'm drawn to them. I'm fascinated with them. But I also I question them. I at the end of the day, I don't just fall in line and be like, oh, well, that's it. The Anunnaki must have created us to mine gold. I don't just go right in and trust them entirely. And I even did this with the Bible when I started reading the Bible about a year ago. I test the Bible. And this last year, I came across in the book of Esther, the city of Susa, Susa. It's in this region of Mesopotamia where these Anunnaki were said to have come down. It's in this hot spot. It's right above the Persian Gulf in modern day Iraq. But here's the thing. The city is still there to this day. It's not occupied. It's an ancient abandoned city. You can Google it. It's cool to look at, but it's still there today. And in the book of Esther, not only is the city they're talking about there, but if you go and look at the king that they mentioned is a guy named Ahasuerus. He was a real king from that region. He's also called Xerxes. So it all checks out. Time and time again, as I've been reading through the Bible, when I come across stuff like that, I'll set the Bible down and I will go and check into this stuff. Is this real? And time again, cities like the city of David, they're found right where the Bible says they are. And they were being ruled by who the Bible says was ruling there. And I know there's a lot of pushback from this in the secular world. There's a lot of people out there who do not want to concede to this. There are people that will fight you to the death with or without the facts that the Bible is not like this archaeological map of the past. But in my experience, it is.
Yeah,
so I would say put the texts, all of them, to the test.
Yep. And look at all this stuff and look for common themes, and that's how you can and compare that to the Bible, and that's how I try to separate the meat from the bone.
Mm-hmm.
And even with that handbag thing, in the Bible, in the Garden of Eden, we were in the garden, and we were told we could have anything we wanted except for this one tree. Well, then here comes this serpent. Oh yeah, you can partake of this tree. You can have this thing. And then you have this depiction of this bag and them offering this thing that this mean, nasty God said you can't have. Here, we're going to give it to you. And you have all the depictions of the of Enlil and Enki around this tree, going back to the serpent, and these are rebellious fallen entities offering this thing that we were denied by our Creator, and that's how they paint themselves in all these ancient texts. Is they're the good guys. They're giving us all these things, and it fits right in with the biblical narrative and their story.
Yeah. And there are some really diehard Sitchin researchers out there who have said that they got close to people who were close to Sitchin just to get some of those personal stories, like some of the family things, and they say that people who were close to Sitchin in like these hushed tones say that he may have been channeling some of this stuff. I don't know if they used the word channeling, but I think they said he may have been in touch with an entity who was like dictating some of this stuff, like Interview with a Vampire style. Some people believe that he was actually communicating with an Anunnaki in some of his later translations. But again,
he made a lot of the stuff up,
but
he said he translated this stuff. Mike Heiser challenged him. I mean, on Coast to Coast AM in front of millions of listeners repeatedly to a debate, and he was going to prove him to be a fraud, that he couldn't even read the Sumerian and Akkadian, and he never would. Yeah. And then there's even been people that's friends of Sitchin's that come out and said, after he died, that, he just made this stuff up. And he could have been in communion with a muse.
Well,
telling him certain things. Even that Anton guy I was telling you about, he's translated some of these texts and stuff, and he's got some alternate translations, but he's even come out and said some of the stuff he talks about is that he's gotten through visions and channeling.
Oh, the Anton guy has?
Yeah,
Yeah.
he's one of those ancient alien type guys.
Man, it's all over. A lot of these guys, Young, Crowley, Tesla, Nikola Tesla, a lot of these guys were said that they were dictated information. That sometimes they won't say channeling, but it's the same difference.
Yeah.
And if that's remotely true about Sitchin, was he being told the truth? Are you going to trust what's on the other end of the esoteric phone?
Exactly. And I was watching a documentary today. I was doing some research on the Muses.
Yeah.
You know, when you go into the Greek and they talk about the nine sisters, the Muses, and I'm studying up to do an episode on that. And Homer, Hesiod, all these, you know, historians and poets, you know, were so great, you know, in our minds and held in such high regard. And a lot of their original writings, they start off their writings praising the Muses, saying that they are the mouthpiece for the muse. And the things that they are talking about in their stories and the stuff they're dictating was given to them by the muses. And these ancient musicians and writers and all these different people would pray to and channel the muse, and these muses would speak through them and give them songs, give them lyrics, give them stories to write. And I can't remember if it was Hesiod or Homer, but in the opening of one of their books, the very opening line, it is the muse speaking through him, and it says basically that we the muses who do this and enlighten and give this and give that, basically we can spin a good lie and tell you a lie and mislead humanity, or we can give you the truth. It's up to us. And so this entity speaking through this writer was flat out saying, yeah, we lie sometimes, and it's just, you know, luck of the draw whether you get the truth from us or not. But hey, you're going to be entertained.
There's a song I heard recently. It's called Lonely is the Muse. It's about this, basically. It's by Halsey. And she talks about the muse as if it's this entity that will grant artists songs.
Yes.
It's like
that was the ancient thought.
Yeah. And in the song, it's like, you know, it's romanticizing the muse because the muse gets lonely because it jumps around from person to person, but it'll give you like a hit song. But while you're on the jet with $1 million in your bank and you're riding high on success, you're going to forget about the muse, and the muse is going to go to somebody else. And it even has a line in that song where it talks about, you know, wow, you've forgotten about me. Essentially, I'll be the wind, or I'll be the breeze in a wind chime looking for the next artist who needs me. It's crazy. It's about this totally about what we're talking about. And I've got this book here. It's called A Dweller on Two Planets. And it says, you see where it says by Philos?
Yeah.
This was written by a 17-year-old kid in like late 1800s California, who I think he finished it when he was 17. I think he started when he was like 15, who said that this entity Philos.
Yeah, that's one of the 9 sisters.
What?
That's one of the 9 sisters of the muse. There was 9 sisters.
Philos?
That was one of them.
Wow. So he says this is an ancient Atlantean.
I think so. I'm pretty sure.
Well, maybe this. So this kid says that this entity was telling him all about ancient Atlantis and describing how the government ran and how they did politics, and just like he talks about like cell phones and like anti-gravity cars and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it comes from this kid who wasn't even like, you know, he wasn't even in college. He didn't have, they say that he had
I'm sorry. I lied.
Oh, that's okay.
It's not Calliope, Cleo, Erato, Euripides, Melope, Poly, Hymnia, Terscorpia, Thyla, and Urania.
Oh, Phyla. That's close. Yeah, they're like pseudo. Well, they sound like Greek almost names.
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
Greek.
But yeah, I mean, it's crazy, man. Like this book is absolutely wild, and the kid's family, the people who knew him, they would just let him go in his room and write, and he just produced all this information about Atlantis. It's crazy.
Mm. Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
And when I was looking into that too, I thought it was crazy because it's kind of like the seven, Apkallu sages and the fallen angels from Enoch. They each one was given like reign over a certain, technology or skill set. And the same thing with these nine sisters. Some were over music. Some was over the flutes. Some was over the lyre. Some was over theater. Some was over lyrics. Some was over poetry. One was over constellations and the celestial spheres, and so all these different
Yeah.
muses would get channeled for whatever you were
Mhm.
wanting to accomplish.
Yeah, I think that's the terminology that Carl Jung leaned
Yeah.
into as well. I think he referred to the muse as
Mhm.
his source for a lot of the stuff that he created. It's all throughout history, and sometimes it crosses over the spiritual boundary, where it's almost like, or it crosses into like a spiritual realm, where it's like, where, at what point are you pulling stuff? Where's the stuff coming from? Where's this inspiration really coming from? The real crazy stuff. Like when you sit down and if you write 5 pages without even blinking an eye, and you're describing stuff that you barely know anything about, what you have to ask, like, where's that coming from?
Yeah.
That's going to be a great episode that you're talking
It's
about.
a fascinating subject, dude.
What did you call it? The nine
The 9 muses.
muses, man. That's going to be awesome. And we didn't slam the Anunnaki as hard as I thought we were going to today. And I'm glad, because I didn't want to. I didn't want to do that, because I know some people are totally in. They're all in. They believe, some people, I've met people who believe that that is our human origins. But for me, humanity being created to be slaves for gold mining is rhetoric that I think would come from something that wants to keep humanity held down. It just makes more sense to me that we were some sort of extension, like we were duplicated as a lesser version or as a human form of a divine being who created us as an extension of his divine family, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. And it
Like
goes
family.
into Gnostic, the whole Gnosticism. Gnostics really cling to the whole Anunnaki stuff
Mhm.
because Gnostic viewpoint is that, some people will say the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was making people think he didn't exist. Well, the Gnostic will take it a step further and they'll say, no, the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was tricking you into worshiping him as God. So they're saying that Yahweh is basically Satan. And what they say is that in the beginning was Sophia. Sophia was wisdom, and she was the everything. She was in the I can't remember what they called it, but the state of bliss, the all. And she split herself into two, male and female, because the male is the one that builds. The male is the structure and the order. And the male was the demiurge. This was Yahweh. And he created earth. And then he created humanity. Well, then to rule over humanity, he broke himself up into 8 or 9 more fragments. And those are the angels. And they are the prison guards of the planet and help rule and keep the prisoners in line, humanity. And that the demiurge wanted to keep everybody on this slave planet. And when they died, instead of letting their souls escape and return to Sophia and go to the heaven, he keeps them there. And they just keep getting reborn because he's just using them for whatever. And he's just a big control freak. And the angels are all the watchers or the prison guards of this prison planet. And we can't escape and get back to the source. So Sophia, just like the Matrix, plants herself into the system. She goes into the prison planet and puts her spirit inside of another person. And this is the Christ consciousness. So Buddha, Christ, Mohammed, all these enlightened people that had such a profound impact on, Earth, had the Sophia spirit, the Christ consciousness. And they're trying to enlighten the people of Earth and help them escape the prison planet and make it back to Sophia, the source where heaven is. But Yahweh, the ruler of this world, is Satan, and he's wanting everybody imprisoned in this planet. And that's the whole Gnostic viewpoint.
Yeah.
So they really cling to the whole Anunnaki thing, and they say, There you go, Enlil, that's Yahweh. Enki, that is the Satan figure in the Bible, but that's actually Sophia.
That's
coming in and enlightening people and trying to free people and get them off this prison planet and back to heaven.
It's new agey too.
Yeah. Yeah.
You
and it goes along with the Mormons too. The Mormons, their whole belief system is kind of like that too, is that there's this creator God that created this earth, and he's up in heaven having sex constantly and having a bunch of spirit babies. And unless you get married and have bodies and breed, all these spirit babies don't have a body to inhabit. So he's up there just having sex like crazy, popping out all these spirit babies, and then the flesh babies you're having here, that's cars for these spirit babies to drive. And then if you do all the Mormon ceremonies and do everything, be a good boy and girl like you're supposed to, when you die, you get your own planet and you are the god of that planet. And then you get to have sex all day long and make spirit babies for little humans for you to rule over on your planet.
Yeah.
So it goes back to the original lie in Satan, ye shall be as gods.
I think Scientology might have a little bit of that too. L. Ron Hubbard, of course, was basically in the school of Crowley. He was hanging out with Jack Parsons while Jack Parsons was doing personalized reenactments of Crowley's magic in the desert. And in fact, this goes back to that whole UFO religion thing I was telling you about that pops up in 1947, because you have 3 people that converge in the desert in 1947. George, I think I called him Doug on accident. It's George Van Tassel was one of them. He goes out to the Mojave in 1947. He doesn't know that Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard are out there as well. They just happen to be in the same desert in the same year. But what Crowley and L. Ron Hubbard, who would start Scientology later, are doing there is what's called the Babylon working. And it's based off of Crowley's magic. And they documented the whole thing. They journaled it and documented it. And I went back and read through all of that. And Parsons talks about doing the ritual and getting to the last phase of the ritual. And he's being contacted. He's channeling, right? He's got the muse on his shoulder telling him stuff this whole time. And he's being told that, okay, finish this ritual. And then in a couple of months, the entity will be released on the earth in 1947. And but as he's going along, he's getting visuals of this entity, and it's the horror of Babylon. It's a lady riding on a beast. It's totally Ishtar iconography. It's female, and it's just dripping in Ishtar iconography. So basically, he's told that whatever, all these rituals worked, you just have to wait X amount of months.
I think I've heard about this, and some people thought it was Hillary Clinton, and they thought all these different women of power that were born around this time was the incarnation,
the whore of the incarnation of the whore of Babylon. Yeah, but when you get in there and you read it, it just points back to Ishtar, and in the same desert at the same time, Van Tassel's out there saying he's being contacted by an entity named Ashtar, and he's creating this whole UFO movement out of it. He built this thing out there. It's like a weird UFO temple. I can't remember what they called it, but this movement spurred out of it, and all these people were talking about Ashtar. So I don't know how that fits into this, but I'll say this. That's the world that L. Ron Hubbard emerges from when he starts Scientology. So he's got all these crazy sci-fi details to that religion. And I think it's like Masonry, where you don't get everything up front. Like, you have to get deeper, and you have to embed yourself into this secret society, essentially. And then you get revealed truths. You get revealed secrets. And in Scientology, I think it's a lot like, or similar to what you were laying out there with Mormonism. It's all about like space brothers and getting your own planet and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It comes out of this Crowleyan magic. But and we can wind
and the
up.
Stories are similar once again, because it's the same muse.
It's the same muse. The story you told about Sophia splitting herself in two, that sounds to me like a version of the Tiamat story.
But the only difference is with that, though, is it's Marduk that kills her and splits her. She doesn't split willingly.
Sure.
She gets split.
Right. Sure. Like, it goes back, like Nibiru and all that. And I'll say this, I got to give you guys credit. You and Bo Kennedy from the Bump podcast have been very patient with me and very gracious with me publicly as I've tried to work out this whole Tiamat Rahab thing. I appreciate you guys hearing me out, because I'm trying to work through all this in my mind. Like, when I talk about Rahab being a planet and Tiamat and all that stuff, I'm not dogmatic about it. I'm trying to work through this. I'm trying to figure this out. But during Nibiru is this planet that's involved with all this, right? In these Anunnaki texts. And apparently it comes close to Earth every couple thousand years. And one of the translations of the Sumerian text says Nibiru is coming towards, well, it's not Earth, it's coming towards Tiamat. And Nibiru has a moon. Nibiru gets so close to Tiamat that its moon hits Tiamat and splits it in two. Half of Tiamat becomes the asteroid belt, possibly that's called the hammered bracelet in the Bible. The other half becomes Earth. And I've theorized that the piece of Tiamat that became Earth was referred to in the Bible as Rahab. But Tiamat was also a deity and like a governor of the planet, I think. Sometimes maybe depicted as the waters, like Tehom, right? But also a dragon. I think you brought that up too. Tiamat is also associated with this chaos dragon, because Tiamat is said to have summoned the forces of chaos to create 11 monsters so she could destroy her children. So she may have embodied a dragon at one point as well. So, but
that's something I've not really deep dived on. I think we talked about that last time. That's something I've really not looked that much into. I know that Anton guy, he mentioned that was the reason why the Anunnaki came, which I don't know if that's something he read in a tablet or during one of his channelings. But he said that there was a war in heaven between Tiamat, the serpent goddess, and that's what forced them to come to Earth. That's what they were fleeing from. But I actually have a guy, I can't remember his name now, but one of my listeners hooked me up with him. He's an author. He's been on Coast to Coast AM, and he wrote a book. And he's a Christian, but it's about Planet X.
Yeah.
And he thinks that that the star of the Magi seen was this Nibiru Planet X passing by, and it was visible from Earth, and that it rang basically the coming of the Messiah, and that now they're saying that this thing is due to come by and pass by again soon.
Oh, wow.
And that he thinks that this is going to be the second coming of Christ.
Yeah, because they say that NASA has identified a planet called Planet 9 that some people think is this Nibiru. Man, that's fascinating.
Like I said, I've not looked into it.
Yeah.
But I'm supposed to be talking to him, I think next month. So I'll be getting educated on all that stuff and all that stuff.
Yeah, that'll be another great show, man. But and I've theorized too that Tiamat planet was destroyed because there's that asteroid belt up there. It kind of, I don't know, like when you look at all the aspects of it, it does kind of make sense that something like that happened. But I've thought that maybe when Tiamat split, God took that one half and reformed it into the earth, and that's possibly where Genesis in the Bible begins. So I'm still working through all that.
Yeah. I mean, hell, who knows? I mean, because you got so many different creation stories that are similar, because the Enuma Elish talks about killing Tiamat and busting her into pieces and using her pieces to form the earth. The Norse legends talks about this great giant. I think his name was Mimir or something like that. But that basically they kill him. Odin and or Odin's parents, are basically humanity, the first like godly humans, kill this giant and cut him into pieces and use his pieces to form the earth. So it's the killing of a frost giant to create the earth. So you have a lot of these myths about this huge war and the vanquishing of this large chaotic style entity and using its pieces to create earth.
Yeah, that sounded to me like almost like the ice giants from the land of the Nephilim.
Yeah, the Nephilim, yeah.
Nephilim, yeah. It's all interwoven.
It sounds a lot like Nephilim, don't it?
Yeah, it sure does. Sure does. Man, this was great. I knew it was going to be, another good one.
I enjoy talking, but honestly, this is a subject that I know just enough to be dangerous. I mean, this is not something I'm like an expert at. So it was good to just kind of speculate and throw out the nuggets that we knew and just have a good fireside conversation about it.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's what helps propel these conversations to, I think, the level where they need to be these days in this modern era. It's like you want people who are open-minded. You want people who are still figuring stuff out. Like I don't know about you, but I don't really care to hear know-it-alls anymore. I don't want to hear somebody who's telling you how it is.
Yeah.
I think we're in an era of discovery right now, and I'm just trying to do my part, but I'm trying to do my part with modestly. I'm trying to stay humble, and I'm trying to stay not dogmatic about things. And I appreciate that about you, man. I really do.
Hey, man, I'm a very curious guy. I love to read and study all this stuff, and I can honestly say, I mean, I probably read and study more than 60 to 70% of the population, but I have no more clue than anybody. I have more questions than I ever had. And that's part of the journey, man.
Yeah, that's part of this gig. That's part of the hero's journey.
Yes. The more you find out, the more you find out you don't know.
That's it. That's it. Well, thanks again, Justin. Let's do this again sometime and tell everyone where they can find you.
Hey man, I appreciate it. I enjoy the conversations, man. But yeah, anywhere you can consume fine content, man. Find me on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, all the social medias, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook. You can find me on all those fine establishments. Just search up Prometheus Lens Podcast, and you should be able to find this mug. I put out at least 2 or 3 reels a day and keep some stuff pretty consistent on there. Come check us out.
I'm Tim. My podcast is Sixth Sensory Podcast. I spell out six, S-I-X. You can find me on Spotify, Apple, YouTube, and Patreon. And as always, torches high, break the mold, conquer the realm, and thanks for listening.